Hello, Brentwood Oaks, sisters and brothers. It's good to be able to bring you the word this evening. Um, Today we'll continue with the fourth in the Proverbs series. My assignment is to cover chapters 16 through 20, which is not really a huge challenge for these chapters. They're a continuation, really, of Proverbs of Solomon, which started in chapter 10. So that will continue even for the next couple of weeks. But the book of Proverbs, as we have discussed, is one that's classified as wisdom literature, which separates it from many of the other books. It's also written in a poetic style that, for me at least, requires some discipline to read and comprehend what it's saying. But before we get into the Proverbs, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about Solomon and focusing on him for a moment. As the son of David, he had some large shoes to fill to assume the role of king, and he took it very seriously. David, King David, as he neared death, gave Solomon a charge. And I'd like to read, if you would listen, 1 Kings in chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. It says, "When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. 'I'm about to go the way of the earth,' he said, 'so be strong. Show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me.' Which is, if your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel." So Solomon took this charge very seriously. And it was just a little bit later that God spoke to Solomon. And as it says in 1 Kings chapter 3, in verse 5, at Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." And it wasn't something that many of us would probably ask for God if we had that opportunity, which shows the character of Solomon. But he says in verse 9, "Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" And the Lord responded. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." And so it was. In that time, during Solomon's lifetime, Judea and Israel lived in safety, and each man under his own vine and fig tree, which I guess is a figurative term for with prosperity and maybe sustainability. I don't know that that seems that they are living by their own account. But this wisdom that God gave Solomon was more than the ability to understand. It says in 29 that God gave Solomon wisdom and a very great insight and a breadth of understanding, which expands upon the blessing that God gave him. As a matter of fact, he gave him knowledge and understanding of plants and animals, of birds and fish, and of all the creation that God placed in his control. And word got around. It says in verse 34 that from all the nations people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So what we have here in Proverbs is a book of instruction written and compiled by the wisest man to have ever lived on the earth. That is notable, and that is why that we should be reading and gleaming from Proverbs as we can. The Proverbs of Solomon, as it says in the first chapter, are sayings and riddles of the wise. They come in two lines, commonly. They use a simile or a comparison to convey the truth that is learned by experience or knowledge. This book includes guidance to seek wisdom, to shun folly or foolishness. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was written in poetic style. It is one of several books in the Bible that are written in poetic form. So Proverbs doesn't sound like poetry to you and me and to our ears. It doesn't have the iambic pentameter, I guess. But they're not rhyming words, but they are rhyming ideas. So for example, in Proverbs 17:27, it says, "A man of knowledge uses words with restraint, and a man of understanding is even-tempered." Now, those words don't rhyme, but the ideas do. And in it, a man of understanding would be able to comprehend the situation and remain even-tempered. And then a man of knowledge would have the awareness and the knowledge to use his words appropriately and with restraint. So Solomon and the other writers used this poetic instrument to convey wisdom and understanding, for the words of insight and for acquiring the discipline and prudent life that God desires us to have. The purpose of the book is to help the reader to develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. Now, these chapters of the Proverbs, they apply wisdom to everyday life and to most every topic that you can imagine, from family to work to community to neighbors to sex and marriage, money, debt, character, speech, and more than that. I saw in the first 9 chapters that Solomon formed personifications for wisdom and folly. This is to further illustrate the importance for one and the danger for the other. Personified, they could be called Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly. Now, they're as different as they can be, and one leads to life and one leads to death. So let's take a look at how Proverbs addresses Lady Wisdom. And it says, "Esteem her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you." And so how is it that we should address and know? What should we know about Dame Folly? And it says in Proverbs 5, "Her feet go down in death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not." So it's helpful to be able to see that those attitudes and that lifestyle, as it be per wisdom or per folly, has directions that it goes. Last week, Mel provided a very insightful lesson on chapters 10 through 15. And I want to focus on the Proverbs of Solomon, as I mentioned, from 16 to 20. Now, they're much the same, but there are not minute differences, but they're small. In that the Proverbs in chapter 10 through 15 categorically are what they call antithetical, meaning that they're directly opposed. And I'll show you what I mean. They also are contracted. So, for example, in chapter 10, verse 4, it says, "Lazy hands make a man poor, but diligent hands bring wealth." Do you see the opposition between the results of lazy hands and the results of diligent hands. And it's there to teach a lesson. Now, the Proverbs in 16 through 20 are slightly different in that they're consequential. For example, in 16 verse 7, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. And in chapter 19 verse 8, and I love this, he who gets wisdom loves his own soul. He who cherishes understanding prospers. So we see that these show that there are consequences to our choices and our lifestyle. So Mel revealed to us 4 persons that appear throughout the Proverbs of Solomon. I think it's helpful to understand and identify these persons as you read Proverbs. So I'd like to talk a little about them. These characters represent the various responses to God and his person. They serve as caricatures in many ways that help us as readers to identify the persons in the Proverbs that one will have virtue and wisdom, or one who is totally lacking, and whether there are those that would scoff at God, and then there's one that doesn't even see the benefit of it all. So we see these exemplified, characterized in the Proverbs as we read them. We read in prologue in chapter 1 that each of these persons would do well to grasp the teaching contained in Proverbs. These teachings are every bit as relevant today as they were when they were written centuries ago. And in reading these, we may see our own imperfections and see the humanness in us all too readily. The fool thinks what he's doing is right. It says, the way of the fool seems right to him, but the wise man listens to advice. We also see that the fool does not bring honor to his parents. In 1925, it says, the foolish son brings grief to his father and bitterness to the one who bore him. And it seems that the fool, and we've probably known many of these, or many of us have known one, are ready to fight. They're always ready for a quarrel or an argument. It says in 20 verse 3, it is a man's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. Now the simple man believes everything that he hears and is easily led. And it says a simple man believes anything, but a prudent man gives thought to his steps. We also see that the simple man does not really foresee consequences and lacks vision. And it says that the prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. And we get to the mocker. The mocker will not be corrected. It says in 9:7, whoever corrects a mocker invites insult. Whoever rebukes a wicked man incurs abuse. I have received that very rebuke and abuse myself from a mocker. It doesn't go away quickly. The mocker also finds really no consolation, and he shuns relationships. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you will suffer alone. And I think we all would agree that that is very true. And then we get to the wise. The wise is teachable. The wise surrounds himself with good people. For example, in 1920, listen to advice and accept instruction, and in the end, you will be wise. And he who walks with wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Those things often, you just put yourself around good people. How many times have we told that to our kids? Because we ourselves have learned from it maybe the hard way. The wise also show self-control. It says a prudent man keeps his knowledge to himself, but the heart of fools blurts out folly. And then also, and this one really is striking, the wise will show humility and compassion. 16 verse 19 says, better to be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. Listening to these characteristics of these persons, it's clear who we should aspire to be, but it also reminds me of the consequential statements that Jesus made to his disciples at the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. These are similar to the Proverbs in that they're in the poetic style. They're consequential in their outcome, but there's a big difference. And the difference in looking at them side to side is that they show a glaring difference in the way the world actually is and the way God intended it to be. For example, in Proverbs 3:7, it says, do not be wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord and shun evil. That is an instruction from a wise man to the people of God because there is sin in our lives, and this is the way the world is. But the Beatitudes are being taught, not by Solomon, but by Jesus, that by him we're transformed. For example, in Matthew 5:8, it says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. This is the way that the world was intended to be. It's quite a contrast. It may be a leap for some, but I think there is a disparity that is there between what is in the world and what is in the kingdom. So the Proverbs, as it says in chapter 1 of Proverbs, that they're for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, and for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life. So I mentioned earlier that the purpose of reading and studying the Proverbs is to help the reader develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. Yet the Beatitudes give us insight to the world as Jesus sees it. To the merciful, for they will be given mercy. So to live in the kingdom and to acquire kingdom characteristics, to live a life blessed by God with the Spirit of God through Jesus as our salvation and our Redeemer and our guide. So I hope that you will look upon these Proverbs maybe with a different set of eyes and see the various characters and the persons, and maybe see yourself in them, and to know that that the instruction that has been made is for our good, and then also to reflect upon the Beatitudes, that it is these characteristics that we long for to live in the kingdom in ways that Jesus would have us live and to glorify him. So I thank you for your time, and look forward to next week with our next set of Proverbs, and keep studying and reading. Grace and peace to you. Good evening.